Beneath the gentle waves, where the sunlight stretches just far enough to touch the coral, lies a town so familiar, yet full of quiet mysteries, Bikini Bottom. It's easy to think of Bikini Bottom as just a funny little underwater town with talking sponges and crabby bosses. But if you listen closely, really closely, you might begin to hear the echoes of something older, quieter, a history hidden in sand and sea foam. Long before SpongeBob ever flipped a patty, before Squidward played a single off-key clarinet note, before the chum bucket even existed, Bikini Bottom was just a whisper between the currents. They say, in the earliest days of the deep sea, long before structures were built and sea buses swam across jellyfish fields, there was only open ocean, peaceful, untouched. The seafloor here wasn't mapped, and there were no signs or roads, just miles of undisturbed sand and the occasional glowing creature drifting by. But the sea has a way of attracting life where no one expects it. According to one old jellyfish herder, an ancient sea slug named Gus, who supposedly lives in the caves past Rock Bottom, Bikini Bottom began with a single glowing kelp tree. Just one, out in the middle of nowhere. It shimmered like moonlight caught underwater, and fish from all directions were drawn to it. Some say the kelp tree had magic in it. Others say it was just peaceful, a kind of peace the sea folk hadn't felt in a long time. As creatures came to rest under its wide, luminous leaves, a small community started to grow, not with buildings or road, but with campfires made from volcanic stones and stories shared in circles. Whales, dolphins, jellyfish, snails, and even land-wandering turtles, yes, they'd find a way down here somehow, began living together in harmony. They didn't call it Bikini Bottom then. It was just the quiet place, a resting spot between adventures. In those early years, there was no Krusty Krab, no chum bucket, no buildings or signs, just coral groves and kelp forests and the soft murmur of waves above. But then something interesting happened. The first bubble house appeared. No one knows who built it. Some legends say a clever young sponge, long before SpongeBob, figured out how to trap air in coral shells and shape them into livable domes. Others say the sea built it on its own as a gift to the creatures who respected its quiet. Either way, it was the start of something new. Where once there were only resting creatures, now there were homes. Where there were homes, soon came trade. Sea stars offering shiny shells in exchange for jellyfish jelly. Clams being raised in gardens. Even early seapost services with turtles swimming across currents, carrying letters sealed in fish scales. Slowly, the community took shape. The name Bikini Bottom didn't come until much later, and not everyone agrees on where it came from. Some say it was named after a long-lost island above the surface, Bikini Atoll, whose presence subtly influenced the waters below. Others whisper a more fantastical tale, that the ocean floor beneath the town was once the bottom of a magical bikini worn by a sleeping sea giantess who'd turned to coral stone after centuries of dreaming. Far-fetched? Maybe. But in a place like Bikini Bottom, anything's possible. As the years passed, more creatures arrived, drawn by the peace, the shimmer of jellyfish fields, and the calm that only comes from a place built on stories and kindness. One of the first known settlers was a crusty crab named Captain Redbeard, a retired pirate who traded in his gold for gardening gloves. He taught the early residents how to grow underwater potatoes, crustados, and told bedtime tales of sea beasts and sunken cities. He never yelled, never stole, just laughed deeply and always offered tea made from boiled sea moss. His cabin still exists today, if you look closely behind the crusty crab. though it's mostly covered in coral and forgotten by time. The underwater roads were built slowly, following the natural paths carved by drifting currents. Sea snails would slide their way through the grooves, leaving glittery trails that marked the earliest streets. Instead of stop signs, jellyfish floated at intersections, blinking softly like traffic lights, gently guiding the way. And so, little by little, a town began to grow, one shell, one laugh, one jellyfish sting at a time. But not everything was peaceful forever. Whispers began to spread about a tiny green creature who lurked on the edges of town, curious about something new, something secret. As the early streets of Bikini Bottom came alive, glowing softly with bioluminescent coral and jellyfish lanterns, a quiet change began stirring on the town's far edge. It didn't cause a fuss. No one shouted. No big event marked it. But in the shadow of a sponge-shaped rock, something, or rather someone, was watching. A curious figure, small, green, with one big eye and a lot of big ideas. His name? Plankton. No one quite remembers when he arrived. He just was, like the tide. Some believe he drifted in during a current storm, washed up in the tide pools by accident. Others say he had always lived in the deep trenches, scribbling inventions in the sand, waiting for the right time to emerge. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. Plankton didn't come to nap under the kelp tree. He came with purpose. While most of the town found joy in the simple rhythms of life, bubble-blowing contests, late-night clam roasts, kelp noodle parties, Plankton watched and thought and tinkered. His mind never stopped turning. He saw Bikini Bottom not just as a home, but as a system, one that could be improved, organized, controlled. But his ideas weren't all bad, not at first. He once built a little seaweed-powered scooter that helped elderfish get around faster. Another time, he crafted a clam translator, though it mostly just made burping noises. He even tried opening a lemonade stand with glowing deep sea fruit. It fizzled, literally. The town didn't reject him, but they didn't quite understand him either. And sometimes, not being understood can feel a lot like being alone. Now, on the opposite side of town, something very different was happening. A young crab, Eugene Krabs. Back then, just a skinny shell with big claws and an even bigger laugh, was making a name for himself, not with inventions or ideas, but with something far more powerful, flavor. Krabs had inherited a small shack from his grandmother. It wasn't much, barely standing, really. But every morning, the scent of sizzling sea butter and toasted kelp would float through the water. Passers-by would stop, sniff, then float a little closer. Before long, he started handing out warm sea buns stuffed with fried coral crisps, and people started to line up. He didn't call it the Krusty Krab yet. Back then, it was just Krab Shack. No logos, no signs, just a young crab with a spatula and a dream. And that's when it started, a silent tension. Not loud, not angry, just a current shift. Plankton, watching from the shadows, noticed the lines, the smiles, the coins being exchanged for something he didn't create. It stirred something in him, a mix of envy and inspiration. He began working harder, building stranger things, machines with claws, flavor extractors, robotic ovens. Nothing quite worked, but his obsession grew. Meanwhile, Krabs kept it simple. He flipped patties, he whistled tunes, and every night, he tucked away a little more coin into a rusted anchor chest under his bed. But despite this growing difference, the town itself was thriving. Sponge families began moving in, drawn by the warmth of the community. Jellyfish festivals were held in the open meadows with soft music and twinkling lights made of glowing pearls. Even Squidward's ancestors, long-nosed, quiet folk with a love for abstract sculpture, began opening small art galleries in coral canyons. Their work didn't always make sense, but the colors, the colors, they calmed the soul. Turtles from far waters built the first library where sea scrolls floated weightlessly and books were pressed in dried kelp leaves. It quickly became the quietest place in town. And high above, in the glass dome of a visiting Texan squirrel, one of the first land visitors, early plans were drawn for cross-environment exchanges, blending surface science with sea serenity. That squirrel, well, her great-great-great-great-niece would one day be named Sandy Cheeks. But that's a tale for later. For now, Bikini Bottom was a dream drifting beneath the waves, a place where snails meowed in alleyways and seahorses pranced past window panes, where everyone knew the sound of SpongeBob's laugh, even though he hadn't been born yet, where bedtime didn't need clocks. It was marked by the glow of sleeping jellyfish, pulsing in rhythm under the moonlit water. But even dreams, when stirred too much, can ripple into something unexpected. And in a dark corner of the town, behind shuttered vents and whirring machines, Plankton whispered to himself over and over, "There has to be a better way. There must be a formula." As the sun filtered down through the ocean's surface, casting a golden shimmer across the sea floor, Bikini Bottom quietly bloomed into something more than a settlement. It was becoming a community. Life was slow here, not lazy, but intentional. The kind of slow where mornings started with sea tea and gentle conversations, and evenings ended with glowing sea snails curling into their shells, purring quietly as the deep sea cradled the town to sleep. Even the jellyfish floated more gently now, their usual buzz softened into a kind of lullaby above the coral rooftops. And at the center of it all, without even realizing it, young Eugene Krabs was creating something permanent, tradition. Krabs had stopped calling his little shack a shack. It had taken shape. Cleaner windows, a new sign made from driftwood, a proper menu, though it only listed one thing, Krabby sandwich 5 cents. There wasn't yet a Krabby patty, not quite. What he was serving was simpler, fried kelp on warm coral buns, sometimes with a hint of mystery sauce, which may or may not have been mashed sea pickles. But people came. Every day. Not just for the food, but for the comfort, the smell, the familiarity. Children giggled as they balanced their lunch trays. Old sea critters sat in corners, sipping on warm kelp broth. It was peaceful. And in the shadows, Plankton watched. He wasn't angry. Not then. He was puzzled. Why did people keep going to Krabs? Why didn't they want mechanical flavor boosters or digital jellyfish jam dispensers? He kept building. His machines got more complex. One day he unveiled a robotic shrimp that could fry things in 1/10 the time of a regular stove. But when someone tried the food, they said it tasted like warm plastic with a hint of barnacle. Still, Plankton didn't give up. Not yet. He started journaling. Pages and pages of formulas, ideas, theories, dreams. He wrote, "To win their trust, you must win their taste. Emotion and flavor are more connected than science admits. Krabs uses something more, something invisible." And while Plankton puzzled over that invisible something, Krabs, too, was beginning to feel a change. One evening, as the seafloor dimmed and the glow of jellyfish lights flickered through the windows of his shop, Krabs stood behind the counter staring at the griddle. Something felt missing. He flipped the kelp patty once and twice, but it wasn't enough. It needed a crunch, a pop, a secret. That night he wandered into the coral fields, carrying only a lantern and a deep craving for inspiration. And there, beneath a moonlit arch of coral bones, he found a strange plant. Small, purple, round as a bubble, but glowing faintly from within. He bit into it cautiously. It snapped. Salty. Sweet. Unforgettable. The next morning, the first ever true Krabby Patty was born. The town changed overnight. People whispered about it like it was a treasure. Did you try it yet? What was that crunch? It made me remember my grandmother's hugs. The Krabby Patty wasn't just food anymore. It was a feeling. And crabs? He raised the price to 10 cents, then 15. But no one complained. They lined up before dawn. Meanwhile, Plankton's lab grew darker. Not angry dark. Lonely dark. He tasted one of the new Krabby Patties and sat in silence for a full hour. And then he wrote a single line in his notebook. He found it. After that, Plankton stopped trying to cook. He started trying to steal. But we'll get back to that rivalry later. For now, Bikini Bottom continued to blossom in every direction. New buildings rose from coral bricks and sand-swept glass. Street signs were hand-painted with bubble letters. There was a sea cinema that showed drifting reef documentaries narrated by narwhals. An entire alley dedicated to sand sculpture contests. Everywhere you turned, it felt like the sea was smiling. And in a cozy pineapple, still uninhabited, sitting quietly at 124 Conch Street, a few faint bubbles began rising from the soil. A sign, a hint, that someone special would arrive soon. As Bikini Bottom grew into the quiet heart of the sea, it began to settle into its identity. Not as a grand kingdom or shining metropolis, but as a warm, weird, wonderful underwater town where the ordinary was always just a little bit magical. And somewhere, slowly rising through the folds of time and tide, the last piece of its heart was floating closer. A sponge. Not just any sponge. The coral whispered of his coming. The kelp bent slightly when the currents passed. And when the jellyfish danced above the jellyfish fields, they sometimes pulsed in patterns that looked almost like a face. Round. Smiling. Wide-eyed. At the edge of the sea, on a soft, sandy current, SpongeBob SquarePants arrived. No big entrance, no bubbles announcing him, just a small sponge with an open heart and an alarm clock that would soon become the most famous in all the ocean. He settled into the pineapple at 124 Conch Street, a home that seemed to have been waiting for him all along. Furniture fit perfectly. The stairs didn't creak. And Gary, his faithful Snail, curled beside his bed like he'd always belonged there, too. No one questioned it. Some things just fit. In those early days, SpongeBob was just another hopeful resident, eager to find his place. He wandered Bikini Bottom like a wide-eyed traveler, getting stuck in the revolving door at the First National Bank of Coral, giggling in the aisles of the bargain mart at all the oddly shaped cans, and staring in absolute wonder at the Krusty Krab, nose pressed to the glass, watching crabs flip patties like a master of underwater ballet. To SpongeBob, this town wasn't just a place to live. It was a dream. And when he applied for a job at the Krusty Krab, suit too small, hat too big, resume written in crayon, something unexpected happened. Crabs, ready to laugh him out the door, paused. Because in that moment, a huge group of anchovies stormed the restaurant, demanding food. Dozens of them. Loud, hungry, chaotic. Crabs panicked. Squidward hid behind the register. It was a disaster. Until SpongeBob, nervous but determined, zipped away, found the spatula, and returned with tray after tray of perfectly cooked Krabby Patties. The anchovies cheered. Crabs blinked. Squidward grumble. And just like that, SpongeBob was hired. His joy lit the town like a lantern. He sang on his way to work, said hello to every snail, jellyfish, and clam he passed. He gave cookies to the garbage collectors. He learned everyone's favorite Krabby Patty toppings by heart. And people noticed. The town felt brighter. Even Squidward, who would never admit it, felt the mornings get a little less gray. SpongeBob wasn't trying to be important, he just was. His laughter echoed through jellyfish fields. His imagination turned cardboard boxes into rocket ships. His kindness made even the grumpiest sea creatures pause and smile for a second longer than usual. And through it all, Bikini Bottom became complete. The final thread in its tapestry had been woven. Crabs and his restaurant full of charm and greed. Plankton and his ever-growing schemes and sadness. Squidward, the misunderstood artist longing for peace. Patrick, SpongeBob's best friend, a philosopher of nothingness and naps. Sandy, the surface scientist with a heart as big as Texas. And SpongeBob, the glue, the sunshine, the unexpected hero. But here's the beautiful thing about Bikini Bottom. It never tries to be more than it is. It's still just a little town at the bottom of the sea, where snails meow, where pickles are serious business, where neighbors argue and hug in the same breath, where bubble blowing is an art and friendship is the only treasure that matters. And when the currents slow down at night, when the jellyfish sleep and the town dims to a gentle glow, you can still hear it. The sound of SpongeBob's soft humming as he washes the last dish. The creak of Squidward's chair as he sketches quietly by candlelight. The muffled snores of Patrick under his rock. And the flicker of Plankton's computer screen as he mutters, "Tomorrow I'll get it right." Bikini Bottom began as a glowing kelp tree under a quiet ocean. It grew not from ambition, but from connection, from kindness, from laughter, from the little things. And though the world above may forget it's there, deep below the waves, the town still breathes, still dreams, still waits for the next story to unfold, quietly. Before jellyfish fields and boating school exams, before the pineapple house glowed with laughter, SpongeBob was just a small, square sponge, soft and curious, living with his parents in a cozy little house shaped like a sea sponge dome at the edge of Coral Lane. His room wasn't fancy. A small bed with a faded blue blanket, a cracked lava lamp that hummed softly, a window that looked out into a garden of slow-growing coral and sleepy sea lilies. But to young SpongeBob, it was perfect, because his imagination filled in all the missing pieces. Every morning he woke up before the sunbeams reached the sand, his eyes wide with excitement for, well, anything. He would peek out of his window and whisper, "Good morning, world. I'm ready." And most of the time, the world whispered back. His mother, Margaret, was the warmest sponge you could meet. Her voice was like a seashell held to your ear, calm and full of stories. She made seaweed pancakes shaped like jellyfish, always with a drizzle of coral syrup in a heart shape. His father, Harold, was soft-spoken and thoughtful. He worked at the Bubble Bank downtown, wore tiny round glasses, and always had a pencil behind his ear, though he never used it. But he did use his voice to tell SpongeBob bedtime stories every night. Stories of bubble nights, lost sea kingdoms, and a legendary jellyfish made of starlight. SpongeBob believed in all of it. He didn't have many toys, just a small collection of hand-carved coral figures his dad had made. A tiny crab with a crooked smile, a grumpy squid, and a jellyfish with only 5 legs. He played with them for hours, building entire worlds in the sand under the kitchen table, giving each one a name, a goal, a bedtime snack. But even back then, SpongeBob wanted more. Not more stuff. Not more noise. Just more connection. More of the world. He had questions. Why do jellyfish glow? Where do bubbles go when they pop? Can snails have dreams? His mom answered what she could, and when she didn't know, she would say gently, maybe the ocean keeps some secrets just for you to discover. And so SpongeBob kept his ears and heart open, just in case the sea ever whispered the answers back. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly elders and sea cucumbers who moved slowly and liked naps. There weren't many other kids around, but one lived next door, a slightly older pink sea star named Patrick. He didn't say much. Didn't seem to do much either. But SpongeBob was fascinated by him. One day, SpongeBob waddled over and offered Patrick a dried seaweed snack. Patrick took it, blinked, and said, "Tastes like green." And just like that, they were best friends. They spent endless hours lying on the soft sand near the coral edge, staring up at the sea surface, pretending it was the sky. Patrick believed the sun was just a giant fried egg someone dropped. SpongeBob thought it might be a glowing jellyfish queen. They never argued. They just wondered together. They built castles out of broken shells and bubble wrap, named every rock they found, and invented games that made no sense but always ended in laughter. At night, when the town was still and the only sound was the bubbling of nearby vents, SpongeBob would lie in bed with Gary curled on his chest. Yes, Gary was there from the beginning, a birthday gift from his parents, chosen from a quiet snail shelter run by an old octopus with dusty glasses. Gary didn't purr much then. He was shy, cautious. But SpongeBob whispered to him every night, "You don't have to talk. I'll do the talking. You just rest, Gary." And over time, Gary began to trust him, one slow blink at a time. SpongeBob's childhood was quiet, not lonely, just soft, safe, wonder-filled. He didn't know what the future would bring: jobs, rivals, jellyfish stings, boating school failures. He just knew that every day brought a new small joy, a funny-shaped cloud above, a smooth stone underfoot, a warm smile from his mom. And somewhere deep in his tiny square heart, he knew he was meant for something. But not something big. Something good. Something kind. A life made of laughter, jellyfish fields, and love. As SpongeBob grew, so did his imagination. His favorite game of all was one he played alone in the living room, using only a mop, a pillow, and an empty cereal box. He called it Captain Clean Bottom and the Sudsy Crusade. In his mind, he was a soap-powered hero, sailing across bubble seas, rescuing trapped snails and battling evil stains. The mop was his sword. The pillow was a loyal sea companion named Puff Puff. And the cereal box? That was his treasure chest, filled with pretend gold and leftover peanut brittle. His parents didn't always understand the game, but they always watched, smiling, occasionally ducking when the mop sword came too close. Outside, Bikini Bottom was beginning to stretch its fins. The town was still small and sweet, but new things were happening. A little boating school opened near Jellyfish Lake. A clam theater showed slow-moving underwater documentaries with deep-voiced narrators. And the coral garden near SpongeBob's house started attracting young jellyfish and baby sea stars playing tag between the plants. That's where SpongeBob and Patrick spent their afternoons, even when they didn't say a word for hours. Patrick liked to nap in the sunbeams that filtered through the water. SpongeBob liked to poke sea bugs with a stick and imagine they were part of an ancient kingdom. He even gave them roles. The tiny red one with one eye, General Ziptail. The one with too many legs, Sir Wiggly Wiggleston the third. Patrick just snored softly beside him. One day, as SpongeBob and Patrick built a fort made entirely of empty clam cans, a shadow passed overhead. It was tall, orange, and walking upright. "Howdy," it said in a cheerful, twangy accent. "Y'all seen any acorn seeds around here?" They stared. The creature was wearing a diving suit, a full-on air helmet with boots and a tail. "I'm Sandy," she said, tipping an imaginary hat. "I'm new here." SpongeBob blinked. "Are you, a sea robot?" Sandy laughed. "Nah, I'm a squirrel from Texas." Patrick said without opening his eyes, "What's a Texas?" From that moment on, SpongeBob was fascinated. Sandy didn't live nearby yet. Her dome wasn't finished, but she visited often. She taught them about trees, the stars, gravity, and even something called karate, though SpongeBob thought she said carrot tea at first and brought snacks instead. Sandy called him Sugar Cube, and SpongeBob, well, he just called her Cool. He started dreaming of building things, bubble machines, jellyfish catchers, even a snail translator, though Gary just looked at it, meowed once, and rolled away. Around this time, SpongeBob began helping more around the house. He washed dishes with extra bubble flare, cleaned windows using jellyfish jelly. Didn't help, but it smelled amazing. And every Friday he made his own dinner: toasted kelp crackers, sea tomato slices, and square cheese cut with precision. But more than anything else, SpongeBob loved pretending to cook. He used Play-Doh patties and spongy buns and made fake menus. His bedroom became the sponge grill. His stuffed toys were the customers. Gary was the VIP. "One patty for Mr. Crabster. Extra bubbles, no onions. Coming right up." He didn't know it yet, but deep in his little sponge heart, a seed had already been planted, one that would grow into the love of a lifetime. And then came his favorite memory. It was a calm afternoon, the water warm and glowing. SpongeBob was lying on his back in the coral field, hands behind his head, Patrick napping beside him as usual. Suddenly, SpongeBob sat up. "I think I want to be happy forever." Patrick opened one eye, confused. "What's that mean?" SpongeBob tilted his head. "I don't know. But I think it's like making people laugh and cooking and helping and not letting the world turn all grumpy." Patrick blinked. "That sounds hard." SpongeBob smiled. "Maybe. But what if we practiced?" Patrick rolled onto his side and mumbled, "Wake me when it's time to be happy." SpongeBob giggled. "Okay, buddy." The days blurred like warm currents, and childhood, as it always does, floated by gently, like a jellyfish riding the tide. But those early years, full of giggles, soft beds, sea pancakes, and underwater dreams, stayed tucked in SpongeBob's memory, even as he grew older. 'Cause some parts of you never really grow up, especially the ones that laugh easily. The first time SpongeBob wore his square pants, he didn't really mean to make a fashion statement. They were a birthday gift from his grandma. A bit too stiff, a bit too roomy, and perfectly square. "You look like a handsome little sponge cake," she said, pinching his cheek with loving, seaweed-slick fingers. At first, SpongeBob was unsure. The pants made a squeaky sound when he walked, and Patrick said he looked like a drawer. But something about them felt just right, like they matched his energy, his optimism, and the fact that he saw the world a little differently. So he wore them, again and again. And eventually, they became part of him. By now, SpongeBob was spending more and more time at Mrs. Puff's boating school, though not exactly by choice. His parents had gently insisted, believing it was time he learned something practical. And SpongeBob, eager to please and even more eager to imagine boats as underwater dragons, agreed. But his mind wandered. While Mrs. Puff explained rudder positions and turning signals, SpongeBob doodled smiling sea creatures in the margins of his notebook. He imagined boating as a daring sea quest, not a choreographed set of turns and rules. Still, he tried. He sat straight. He listened hard. And every time he took the wheel, he believed this would be the time he'd pass. It never was. After one particularly spirally sideways wall-crashing test, Mrs. Puff sighed and muttered, "He's not bad, he's just enthusiastic." SpongeBob thought that was a compliment. So he made her a card the next day. It had glitter, googly eyes and a bubble that read, "Thanks for not giving up on me." Mrs. Puff kept it on her desk. Still does. At home, things stayed soft and sweet. Gary had grown chubbier, slower, and even sassier. He now had a favorite pillow, a preferred jellyfish jelly flavor, and a tendency to knock things off shelves when SpongeBob wasn't looking. But he was still the same loyal little snail. And when SpongeBob had rough days, Gary knew exactly how to curl up beside him and purr just loud enough to make the sadness melt away. Sometimes SpongeBob would sneak out just before bedtime. Not to cause trouble, but to float. He'd drift up through the water just far enough to see the moonlight shimmer above and lie back with his arms stretched out like a sea star. There in the quiet, he'd think. Not big thoughts, not sad thoughts, just sponge thoughts, like do clouds underwater dream? Why do jellyfish always know where to go? Will I ever make the perfect patty? He didn't need answers. The sea didn't rush him. It just rocked him gently. One night, as he floated beneath the stars, or at least the glowy plankton pretending to be stars, he heard a sound. Soft, wobbly, like a half-hiccuped sigh. It was Patrick. "Hey, buddy," SpongeBob whispered. "Can't sleep?" Patrick shrugged, drifting closer like a sleepy balloon. "I had a dream my house turned into pudding, and I couldn't find my bed, just spoons." SpongeBob nodded seriously. "That's very serious." It was banana pudding. Even more serious. They floated there together, side by side, in silence. After a while, Patrick mumbled, "Do you think we'll still be best friends when we're older?" SpongeBob didn't hesitate. "Of course. We'll still have jellyfish races. We'll still build things out of cans. Maybe I'll work at a restaurant, and you'll taste everything I cook." Patrick grinned sleepily. "What if I get really good at napping, like professionally?" SpongeBob giggled. "You're already halfway there." And with that, the two friends drifted slowly back down toward home, the coral reef below glowing softly like a lullaby. Back on land, or rather, back in SpongeBob's room, the walls were covered in little dreams. Drawings taped up without order. Paper cutouts of jellyfish. A handcrafted badge that read, "Future Fry Cook of the Year." A calendar with made-up holidays like National Bubble Wrap Appreciation Day. It was a cozy kind of chaos, the kind only a sponge could love. And in the middle of it all was his bed, round and springy, with a pillow that always smelled faintly of sea foam and soap. That night, SpongeBob fell asleep with a content sigh, his arms wrapped around a stuffed clam named Bubbles. Gary snored quietly beside him. Somewhere in his dreams, jellyfish danced, a clarinet hummed in the distance, and the sea whispered stories only children could understand. As SpongeBob grew a little older, his world expanded just enough to feel exciting, but not enough to overwhelm him. He started exploring more of Bikini Bottom, hopping along bubble streams and drifting through coral alleys with wide-eyed wonder. Everything fascinated him. Every shell, every seahorse, every oddly shaped rock that looked like a celebrity. And the best part? He had an endless imagination. Where others saw a boring patch of sand, SpongeBob saw a battlefield of bubble warriors. A crooked seaweed strand became a whip in the hands of a heroic cowboy sponge. A lone jellyfish? A secret agent on a mission. The sea was his playground. But more importantly, it was his storybook. One warm afternoon, his parents took him to the Krusty Krab for the very first time. Not because they loved fast food, but because they'd heard it was safe. And SpongeBob had been asking for weeks. Mr. Krabs stood behind the counter as proud as a pirate king. "Welcome to the finest eatery in all the 7 seas," he bellowed. SpongeBob stared in awe. The sizzling sounds, the smell of grilled patties, the sound of ketchup bottles being squeezed. It was magic. He sat quietly at the booth with his little legs swinging below, eyes scanning every inch of the kitchen through the service window. "One day," he whispered, "I'm going to work there." His mom smiled. His dad chuckled. But SpongeBob meant it. That night, he went home and built a mini Krusty Krab out of cardboard boxes and shoelaces. He made a spatula from a bent fork. He scribbled his own menu, listing items like Super Bubble Patty and Jellyfish Deluxe. Gary was the customer, Patrick, the lazy cashier, and SpongeBob, the happiest fry cook in the deep blue sea. Even in play, SpongeBob gave it his all. Every flip, every pretend order, every over-the-top greeting like, "Welcome to the Krusty Krab. Would you like joy with that?" It wasn't about the food. It was about the feeling. The feeling of serving something with love, of making someone smile, of being part of something special. Later that year, SpongeBob joined a bubble-blowing club at the community center. It wasn't very popular. In fact, most days it was just him, a tub of bubble soap, and a crusty instructor who didn't say much except, "Respect the wand, respect the form." But SpongeBob didn't mind. He learned to blow cubes, stars, duck-shaped bubbles. He even invented one called the Twister Pop Float, which spiraled upward like a tiny tornado and made a gentle pop when it burst. One evening, just before sunset, SpongeBob blew a giant bubble shaped like a boat. It hovered gently in the water, reflecting the golden light. Patrick climbed in. And for just a moment, they floated through the reef in silence, watching fish glide past like glowing lanterns. No words, just the sound of their own quiet joy. Of course, SpongeBob wasn't always happy. There were days when his boating tests went worse than usual. Days when he felt small, not smart enough, not strong enough, too silly. Days when he overheard others say things like, "He's nice, but weird." He never said much about it. But on those days, his smile would droop ever so slightly. His pineapple house felt a bit too quiet. Even Gary's cheerful meows didn't quite fix it. So, he wrote, he had a secret notebook hidden behind his bookshelf, filled with doodles, half-finished comic strips, and little letters to himself. "Dear SpongeBob, it's okay to be different. Today wasn't great, but tomorrow might be. You don't need to be perfect, just kind." He didn't show it to anyone, but it helps. One evening, his grandma came over to babysit. She baked kelp cookies, told him a bedtime tale about talking sea cucumbers, and braided his spongy hair with coral beads. Before tucking him in, she kissed his forehead and said, "You got a special kind of sparkle, Bobby. Not everyone will see it, but it's there. Keep shining." SpongeBob smiled softly, the words curling up in his heart like a warm blanket. That night, he dreamed of a big kitchen, of golden patties sizzling on the grill, of customers laughing, of friends nearby, of purpose. And in the middle of it all was him, smiling, flipping, glowing. The next morning, he woke up a little earlier than usual. He made breakfast for his parents, brushed Gary, cleaned his room. Then he stood in front of the mirror, straightened his square pants, and whispered, "One day, I'll make the world a better place, one happy bite at a time." And with that, he walked out into the glowing morning sea, ready for whatever came next. Still silly, still kind, still just a sponge with a big dream. When the world is quiet and the deep sea hums like a lullaby, one little snail glides softly across the tiled floors of a pineapple home. His name is Gary. To most of Bikini Bottom, he's just a pet, a snail who meows, a creature that eats and naps and occasionally leaves a trail of glittering slime. But to SpongeBob, Gary is something much more. He's a best friend, a gentle listener, a little guardian in a shell, and perhaps something even deeper than that. Gary didn't always live with SpongeBob. Long before he curled up on a cozy pet bed beneath SpongeBob's nightstand, Gary had a past. Not a dramatic one, not a tragic one, but a quiet, mysterious one. Some say Gary came from the snail sanctuary of Jellyfish Fields, a peaceful patch of coral plains where snails live freely, sliding through the soft moss, humming in unison, and gathering around moonlight puddles to stargaze. Others whisper that Gary's breed is rare, that he comes from a long line of ancient snails once owned by sea sorcerers, philosophers, and poets. Of course, SpongeBob never asked. He didn't care where Gary came from. He only cared that Gary was there. The first time SpongeBob met Gary, it wasn't some grand pet adoption day or birthday gift. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sea feels still and gray, and the kelp leaves outside barely sway. SpongeBob had been walking home from school, lunchbox in hand, when he saw a little shell peeking out from behind a storm drain. The snail didn't move, didn't meow, just looked at him with eyes so round, so calm, it felt like time slowed. SpongeBob bent down and said, "Hi there. You look like you need a warm place to rest." And just like that, they walked home together. No collar, no leash, no questions asked. That night, Gary curled into a soft towel SpongeBob laid on the floor. And by morning, he was already purring like a sea kitten. Gary isn't loud. He isn't flashy. He doesn't play the clarinet or flip Krabby Patties or win jellyfishing awards. But Gary observes. He watches SpongeBob when he's laughing and when he's quietly staring at the ceiling late at night. He notices when the sponge's eyes droop with exhaustion or when he's bouncing with excitement after a new jellyfish discovery. And in those moments, Gary is there. A nudge of the shell, a soft, melodic meow. A little trail that leads SpongeBob back to the kitchen, reminding him he hasn't eaten yet. Many nights, long after SpongeBob has drifted into a deep sleep, Gary remains awake. He watches over the pineapple house like a sentry, slowly gliding from room to room, checking windows, straightening little things with his shell, nudging doors closed. And sometimes, just sometimes, he climbs up onto the windowsill and stares at the sea stars. His eyes shimmer like pearls, and his body glows faintly in the moonlight. What does he think about? No one really knows. But maybe, deep in his little snail heart, Gary remembers something. Some whisper of the universe. Some memory of what it means to belong. There's a theory passed around in old sailor bars near the coral canyons. They say some snails are born with memory beyond their years. Not words, not timelines, but feelings. A sense of where they've been, who they've touched, and who they're meant to help. If that's true, then maybe Gary chose SpongeBob long before that rainy afternoon. Maybe he was waiting for a sponge so kind, so full of unfiltered joy and imagination that he couldn't help but follow him home. But Gary's love isn't always soft. He's not just a purring pet who eats cookies and naps in baskets. When SpongeBob forgets his self-worth, Gary reminds him. When SpongeBob loses focus, Gary gives him the look. You know the one, eye stalks raised and lips pursed, silent judgment heavy in the air. And when SpongeBob tries to make everyone happy but forgets about himself, Gary meows louder than anyone else in the room. Because Gary sees what others don't. He sees the heart inside that square sponge. He sees the quiet nights when SpongeBob worries he's not enough. And he responds, not with speeches, but with steady presence. Some say you don't choose your pet. Your pet chooses you. And Gary? Gary chose SpongeBob. With every meow, with every quiet glide across the kitchen floor, with every patient stare that says, I understand you. You're doing just fine. There's something peaceful about the way Gary moves. No rush. No hesitation. Just a slow, thoughtful pace, like he knows exactly where he's going, and he's in no hurry to get there. In a world filled with noise, chaos, and Krabby Patty orders shouted across a sizzling grill, Gary is a soft whisper in the background, a living reminder to slow down, breathe, observe. SpongeBob once joked that Gary was the smartest one in the house, and well, he wasn't wrong. You see, Gary's mind is surprisingly sharp. He solved puzzles, built machines, written poetry, probably, and even navigated his way through Bikini Bottom when SpongeBob was lost. And he does it all in silence. No drama, no need for applause. Just a quiet confidence, like the sea itself. SpongeBob sometimes talks to Gary when no one else is around. Not just the silly stuff like what to have for dinner or who left the jelly in the sink again, but real things. Big things. Gary, do you think I'm doing enough? Gary, what if I never become manager? Do you think Patrick is mad at me? Gary never replies with words, of course. But SpongeBob always seems to understand his answers. A blink, a head tilt, a warm meow, soft and slow like a lullaby. It's their unspoken language. And maybe that's the most special thing about their bond. It doesn't need explanation. There's a room in the back of the Pineapple House, small, quiet, covered in seashell wallpaper and soft, sandy carpet. That's Gary's room. Not a kennel, not a corner. A whole room, just for him. Inside, there's a circular pet bed made from recycled sea sponge, a low bookshelf filled with picture books. SpongeBob reads aloud at night, and a ceiling light that glows like the moon when dimmed. Sometimes, Gary doesn't even sleep in his room. He prefers the bathroom floor where it's cool, or the kitchen tile where he can hear the gentle hum of the refrigerator. But that room is his safe space, and in that room, Gary dreams. What does a snail dream about? Maybe slow chases through glowing tide pools. Maybe floating through coral clouds under starlit waters. Or maybe he dreams of SpongeBob's laughter, the kind that fills a room and makes even the seashells smile. In his dreams, Gary is free, not just a pet, not just a companion, but a being of curiosity, comfort, and quiet magic. There's a theory in Bikini Bottom, a bedtime story passed from grandmas to grandkids, that snails are secret keepers, that their shells hold tiny fragments of memories, not just their own, but the emotions of those they love. And that if you listen closely to the soft hum of a snail's meow, you can hear stories. Tiny echoes, pieces of feelings stored deep inside the spiral of their shell. If that's true, then Gary holds a lot. Every adventure, every worry, every burst of joy and pinch of sadness SpongeBob has ever shared with him. Gary never forgets. He simply carries it, quietly, lovingly, like a tiny shelled journal of SpongeBob's heart. One stormy night, SpongeBob had a nightmare. The thunder outside rumbled like giant drums, shaking the coral walls. SpongeBob tossed and turned, muttering in his sleep. Something about being alone, being forgotten, drifting far away. And Gary? He didn't hesitate. He climbed out of his little bed, slid gently up the blanket, and curled right on SpongeBob's chest. No noise, no fuss, just a weight, a warmth, a reminder. You're not alone. I'm right here. SpongeBob's breathing calmed, his dreams softened. And in the morning, neither of them said a word about it. They didn't have to. Gary is more than a pet. He's a rhythm, a presence, a thread that holds the corners of SpongeBob's world together. He might not have arms to hug with or a voice to sing with, but when SpongeBob is smiling, really smiling, Gary is always somewhere nearby, watching, meowing softly, content just to be part of the moment. Even when the day ends and the lights dim and the pineapple home grows still, Gary doesn't ask for attention. He doesn't beg for treats or chase shadows or scratch the walls. He simply rests, shell tucked gently under his head, eyes slowly blinking like a lighthouse fading into the night. Because in Gary's quiet way, he knows he's loved, and he knows he's needed. Not for tricks, not for noise, but for being there, always. If you ask SpongeBob about his best friend, he might laugh and say, "Patrick, of course." But when the day is over, when the jellyfish are tucked away, and the Krabby Patties are done sizzling, when the town is quiet, and SpongeBob is finally alone with his thoughts, it's Gary who's there. Always has been. Gary was there long before SpongeBob had a job, a neighbor, or even confidence in his own laugh. Before the Krusty Krab. Before driving school. Before the world knew who SpongeBob SquarePants was, Gary already knew. Back then, they lived in a tiny coral nook. Just a little seashell-colored hut by the edge of the reef. It had only one room, and it smelled faintly of wet kelp and sea salt. SpongeBob was still figuring out life. Still learning how to tie his shoes. Still deciding what kind of sponge he wanted to be. And Gary? He was the one constant. Curled at the foot of the bed, waiting patiently while SpongeBob practiced jellyfish calls. Meowing softly when things didn't go right. Purring in that low, quiet way only he could, like a soft underwater drumbeat, reminding SpongeBob, "You're doing fine. You're growing." There's an unspoken comfort in routine, and Gary is part of everyone. Morning wake-ups? Gary is the first to stir, not loud, not forceful. Just a tiny tap of his shell on the tile floor, a soft, sleepy meow. SpongeBob stretches, yawn, smiles. Good morning, Gare Bear. And they begin. Breakfast. Gary gets snail bites in a tiny ceramic dish, placed exactly 2 inches from the corner of the kitchen. SpongeBob talks to him while cooking kelp cakes. The conversation might sound one-sided to others, but to them it's full and alive. Even SpongeBob's bathtub concerts, Gary's always front row. He doesn't flinch when SpongeBob hits a high note. He doesn't scoot away when bubbles overflow. He just sits, listens, accepts. No judgment, just presence. And that's the thing about Gary. He's not there to fix anything. He doesn't rush in when SpongeBob has a bad day or try to solve problems. He's simply there, with his soft shell, his quiet gaze, his slow, steady breath, like a little ocean anchor in SpongeBob's life. There was a time SpongeBob lost Gary, just for a little while, but long enough for SpongeBob to feel like the world had tipped over. The pineapple felt empty. His laughter felt forced. Even the Krusty Krab didn't taste the same. He wandered all of Bikini Bottom, flyers in hand, tears in eyes. And just when the search felt endless, there was Gary, in the care of an old woman who'd taken him in, mistaking him for a stray, pampered, warm, safe. But the moment Gary saw SpongeBob, he knew. No hesitation. He slithered into SpongeBob's arms like he'd just woken up from a long nap and found his dream again. That reunion? SpongeBob didn't cry out of relief. He cried because something inside of him had been missing, and now it was whole again. That's the kind of love Gary brings. He's not just part of the home. He is the home. Not the walls, not the furniture, but the feeling, the peace, the grounding. When SpongeBob is overwhelmed, Gary is there. When SpongeBob is joyful, Gary is there. When the world outside is spinning, Gary stays still. Sometimes SpongeBob writes poems about Gary. Silly ones, sweet ones, rhyming couplets about snails and friendship. Oh, Gary, my snail, so quiet and round, you're the best little pet I have ever found. You purr and you meow in the cutest of ways. I'll love you forever, through all of my days. They're scribbled in journals, pinned to corkboards, taped to the fridge. Gary can't read them, of course, but somehow he always seems to know when they're about him. He blinks slowly, leans in closer, lets out a low, grateful meow, as if to say, I love you too, SpongeBob. And at night, the routine begins again. Lights dimmed, blankets pulled up. The pineapple home sighs into stillness. SpongeBob sometimes talks in his sleep. Little fragment of jellyfish dreams and Krusty Krab adventures. And in the quiet, Gary listens. He doesn't sleep the same way SpongeBob does. Snails drift, half aware, half asleep, resting in soft stillness while the ocean hums. And in that soft, nightlight glow, Gary watches over him. Not guarding, just being there. Because sometimes, just knowing someone is close, someone who loves you, who knows you, who hears you even in silence, is all it takes to fall peacefully asleep. Bikini Bottom is full of characters with bold personalities. Patrick with his wild ideas, Sandy with her science and spark, Squidward with his moods and music. But Gary? Gary doesn't need a spotlight. He's the quiet one, the background rhythm, the unspoken melody in the song of SpongeBob's life. He doesn't chase attention. He doesn't perform. He just lives. Softly, calmly, lovingly. And maybe that's his greatest magic. He teaches by example. That it's okay to be quiet. To observe instead of speak. To love with your presence, not just your words. When SpongeBob was a bit younger, he once tried to teach Gary tricks. Roll over, fetch a shell, sit still on command. Gary stared at him with patient eyes, then slowly turned away and went to nap on a warm towel in the sunlight. SpongeBob laughed, and that was the end of training. Because Gary already had his way of communicating. Through head tilts, blinks, the pace of his slow crawl, and those signature meows, soft, low, sometimes with a questioning rise at the end. It wasn't about control or performance. It was about connection. SpongeBob would later say, Gary doesn't need to speak like me. He just gets me. And isn't that what we all long for? Not to be explained, but simply understood. There are long days when SpongeBob comes home from work, drained and dizzy from the bustle of Bikini Bottom. Customers shouting, fryers sizzling, Squidward grumbling. The chaos sticks to him like seaweed. But as soon as he opens the front door, Gary is there. One soft meow, a nudge of the shell. And somehow SpongeBob feels like everything is okay again. He once said, "It's like Gary presses a reset button on my brain." No words, just the calm of shared space. A reminder that home is not just the place, but the soul who waits for you there. They say Gary is just a pet. But sometimes, SpongeBob wonders, what if Gary is more? A guardian snail watching over him since birth. A quiet protector, assigned by the sea itself. An old soul, carrying ocean wisdom in his shell. After all, who else can sense when SpongeBob is about to make a mistake? Before he makes it? Who else can tell when a Krabby Patty has too much mustard, without even tasting it? And who else can recognize SpongeBob's sadness, before SpongeBob himself even notices? There's something mystical about Gary. Not magical in a flashy way, but magical like a lullaby. Or the hush of the tide, or the warmth of a blanket on a cold night. And every so often, when SpongeBob has those quiet, reflective evenings, he'll sit beside Gary and whisper, "You know, Gare, if I ever become famous or rich or anything big, I hope you know you'll always be the reason I got there." Gary never replies, but he blinks twice and leans his shell ever so slightly against SpongeBob's arm. That's enough. Years have passed. But Gary never seems to age. Maybe he's a little slower now. Maybe his shell carries more tiny scratches, each one a memory, a chapter, a day spent beside his best friend. But his spirit, still the same, still gentle, still grounding, still there. Every night, when SpongeBob slips into his square pajamas and crawls into bed, Gary curls up close by, near the foot, never too far. SpongeBob pulls the covers up to his chin and whispers his final thought of the day. "Love you, buddy." A soft meow replies. Then silence. Then sleep. Segment 3. Gary the Snail more than a pet. When the world is quiet and the deep sea hums like a lullaby, one little snail glides softly across the tiled floors of a pineapple home. His name is Gary. To most of Bikini Bottom, he's just a pet. A snail who meows, a creature that eats and naps and occasionally leaves a trail of glittering slime. But to SpongeBob, Gary is something much more. He's a best friend, a gentle listener, a little guardian in a shell. And perhaps, something even deeper than that. Gary didn't always live with SpongeBob. Long before he curled up on a cozy pet bed beneath SpongeBob's nightstand, Gary had a past. Not a dramatic one, not a tragic one, but a quiet, mysterious one. Some say Gary came from the Snail sanctuary of Jellyfish Fields, a peaceful patch of coral plains where snails lived freely, sliding through the soft moss, humming in unison, and gathering around moonlight puddles to stargaze. Others whisper that Gary's breed is rare, that he comes from a long line of ancient snails once owned by sea sorcerers, philosophers, and poets. Of course, SpongeBob never asked. He didn't care where Gary came from. He only cared that Gary was there. The first time SpongeBob met Gary, it wasn't some grand pet adoption day or birthday gift. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sea feels still and gray, and the kelp leaves outside barely sway. SpongeBob had been walking home from school, lunchbox in hand, when he saw a little shell peeking out from behind a storm drain. The snail didn't move, didn't meow, just looked at him with eyes so round, so calm. It felt like time slowed. SpongeBob bent down and said, "Hi there. You look like you need a warm place to rest." And just like that, they walked home together. No collar, no leash, no questions asked. That night, Gary curled into a soft towel. SpongeBob lay on the floor. And by morning, he was already purring like a sea kitten. Gary isn't loud. He isn't flashy. He doesn't play the clarinet or flip Krabby Patties or win jellyfishing awards. But Gary observes. He watches SpongeBob when he's laughing and when he's quietly staring at the ceiling late at night. He notices when the sponge's eyes droop with exhaustion or when he's bouncing with excitement after a new jellyfish discovery. And in those moments, Gary is there. A nudge of the shell, a soft, melodic meow. A little trail that leads SpongeBob back to the kitchen, reminding him he hasn't eaten yet. Many nights, long after SpongeBob has drifted into a deep sleep, Gary remains awake. He watches over the pineapple house like a sentry, slowly gliding from room to room, checking windows, straightening little things with his shell, nudging doors closed. And sometimes, just sometimes, he climbs up onto the windowsill and stares at the sea stars. His eyes shimmer like pearls and his body glows faintly in the moonlight. What does he think about? No one really knows. But maybe, deep in his little snail heart, Gary remembers something. Some whisper of the universe. Some memory of what it means to belong. There's a theory passed around in old sailor bars near the coral canyons. They say some snails are born with memory beyond their years. Not words, not timelines, but feelings. A sense of where they've been, who they've touched, and who they're meant to help. If that's true, then maybe Gary chose SpongeBob long before that rainy afternoon. Maybe he was waiting for a sponge so kind, so full of unfiltered joy and imagination, that he couldn't help but follow him home. But Gary's love isn't always soft. He's not just a purring pet who eats cookies and naps in baskets. When SpongeBob forgets his self-worth, Gary reminds him. When SpongeBob loses focus, Gary gives him the look. You know the one. Eye stalks raised, lips pursed, silent judgment heavy in the air. And when SpongeBob tries to make everyone happy but forgets about himself, Gary meows louder than anyone else in the room. Because Gary sees what others don't. He sees the heart inside that square sponge. He sees the quiet nights when SpongeBob worries he's not enough. And he responds, not with speeches, but with steady presence. Some say you don't choose your pet. Your pet chooses you. And Gary? Gary chose SpongeBob. With every meow. With every quiet glide across the kitchen floor. With every patient stare that says, I understand you. You're doing just fine. There's something peaceful about the way Gary moves. No rush. No hesitation. Just a slow, thoughtful pace. Like he knows exactly where he's going and he's in no hurry to get there. In a world filled with noise, chaos, and Krabby Patty orders, shouted across a sizzling grill, Gary is a soft whisper in the background. A living reminder to slow down. Breathe. Observe. SpongeBob once joked that Gary was the smartest one in the house, and well, he wasn't wrong. You see, Gary's mind is surprisingly sharp. He solved puzzles, built machines, written poetry, probably, and even navigated his way through Bikini Bottom when SpongeBob was lost. And he does it all in silence. No drama, no need for applause. Just a quiet confidence like the sea itself. SpongeBob sometimes talks to Gary when no one else is around. Not just the silly stuff, like what to have for dinner, or who left the jelly in the sink again, but real things. Big things. Gary, do you think I'm doing enough? Gary, what if I never become manager? Do you think Patrick is mad at me? Gary never replies with words, of course, but SpongeBob always seems to understand his answers. A blink, a head tilt, a warm meow, soft and slow like a lullaby. It's their unspoken language. And maybe that's the most special thing about their bond that doesn't need explanation. There's a room in the back of the Pineapple House. Small, quiet, covered in seashell wallpaper and soft sandy carpet. That's Gary's room. Not a kennel, not a corner, a whole room. Just for him. Inside, there's a circular pet bed made from recycled sea sponge, a low bookshelf filled with picture books. SpongeBob reads aloud at night, and a ceiling light that glows like the moon when dimmed. Sometimes Gary doesn't even sleep in his room. He prefers the bathroom floor where it's cool, or the kitchen tile where he can hear the gentle hum of the refrigerator. But that room is his safe space. And in that room, Gary dreams. What does a snail dream about? Maybe slow chases through glowing tide pools. Maybe floating through coral clouds under starlit waters. Or maybe he dreams of SpongeBob's laughter. The kind that fills a room and makes even the seashells smile. In his dreams, Gary is free. Not just a pet, not just a companion, but a being of curiosity, comfort, and quiet magic. There's a theory in Bikini Bottom, a bedtime story passed from grandmas to grandkids, that snails are secret keepers. That their shells hold tiny fragments of memories, not just their own, but the emotions of those they love. And that if you listen closely to the soft hum of a snail's meow, you can hear stories. Tiny echoes. Pieces of feelings stored deep inside the spiral of their shell. If that's true, then Gary holds a lot. Every adventure, every worry, every burst of joy and pinch of sadness SpongeBob has ever shared with him. Gary never forgets. He simply carries it, quietly, lovingly, like a tiny shelled journal of SpongeBob's heart. One stormy night, SpongeBob had a nightmare. The thunder outside rumbled like giant drums, shaking the coral walls. SpongeBob tossed and turned, muttering in his sleep. Something about being alone, being forgotten, drifting far away. And Gary? He didn't hesitate. He climbed out of his little bed, slid gently up the blanket, and curled right on SpongeBob's chest. No noise, no fuss, just a weight, a warmth, a reminder. You're not alone, I'm right here. SpongeBob's breathing calmed, his dreams softened. And in the morning, neither of them said a word about it. They didn't have to. Gary is more than a pet. He's a rhythm, a presence, a thread that holds the corners of SpongeBob's world together. He might not have arms to hug with or a voice to sing with. But when SpongeBob is smiling, really smiling, Gary is always somewhere nearby, watching, meowing softly, content just to be part of the moment. Even when the day ends and the lights dim and the pineapple home grows still, Gary doesn't ask for attention. He doesn't beg for treats or chase shadows or scratch the walls. He simply rests, shell tucked gently under his head, eyes slowly blinking like a lighthouse fading into the night. Because in Gary's quiet way, he knows he's loved, and he knows he's needed. Not for tricks, not for noise, but for being there, always. If you ask SpongeBob about his best friend, he might laugh and say, "Patrick, of course." But when the day is over, when the jellyfish are tucked away and the Krabby patties are done sizzling, when the town is quiet and SpongeBob is finally alone with his thoughts, it's Gary who's there. Always has been. Gary was there long before SpongeBob had a job, a neighbor, or even confidence in his own laugh. Before the Krusty Krab, before driving school, before the world knew who SpongeBob SquarePants was, Gary already knew. Back then, they lived in a tiny coral nook, just a little seashell-colored hut by the edge of the reef. It had only one room, and it smelled faintly of wet kelp and sea salt. SpongeBob was still figuring out life, still learning how to tie his shoes, still deciding what kind of sponge he wanted to be. And Gary? He was the one constant. Curled at the foot of the bed, waiting patiently while SpongeBob practiced jellyfish calls, meowing softly when things didn't go right, purring in that low, quiet way only he could, like a soft underwater drumbeat, reminding SpongeBob, "You're doing fine. You're growing." There's an unspoken comfort in routine, and Gary is part of every one. Morning wake-ups? Gary is the first to stir, not loud, not forceful. Just a tiny tap of his shell on the tile floor, a soft, sleepy meow. SpongeBob stretches, yawns, smiles. "Good morning, Gare Bear," and they begin. Breakfast. Gary gets snail bites in a tiny ceramic dish, placed exactly 2 inches from the corner of the kitchen. SpongeBob talks to him while cooking kelp cakes. The conversation might sound one-sided to others, but to them it's full and alive. Even SpongeBob's bathtub concerts, Gary's always front row. He doesn't flinch when SpongeBob hits a high note. He doesn't scoot away when bubbles overflow. He just sits, listens, accepts. No judgment, just presence. And that's the thing about Gary. He's not there to fix anything. He doesn't rush in when SpongeBob has a bad day or try to solve problems. He's simply there, with his soft shell, his quiet gaze, his slow, steady breath, like a little ocean anchor in SpongeBob's life. There was a time SpongeBob lost Gary, just for a little while, but long enough for SpongeBob to feel like the world had tipped over. The pineapple felt empty. His laughter felt forced. Even the Krusty Krab didn't taste the same. He wandered all of Bikini Bottom, flyers in hand, tears in eyes. And just when the search felt endless, there was Gary, in the care of an old woman who'd taken him in, mistaking him for Stray. pampered, warm, safe. But the moment Gary saw SpongeBob, he knew. No hesitation. He slithered into SpongeBob's arms like he'd just woken up from a long nap and found his dream again. That reunion? SpongeBob didn't cry out of relief. He cried because something inside of him had been missing, and now it was whole again. That's the kind of love Gary brings. He's not just part of the home. He is the home. Not the walls, not the furniture, but the feeling, the peace, the grounding. When SpongeBob is overwhelmed, Gary is there. When SpongeBob is joyful, Gary is there. When the world outside is spinning, Gary stays still. Sometimes SpongeBob writes poems about Gary. Silly ones, sweet ones, rhyming couplets about snails and friendship. "Oh, Gary, my snail, so quiet and round, you're the best little pet I have ever found. You purr and you meow in the cutest of ways. I'll love you forever, through all of my days." They're scribbled in journals, pinned to corkboards, taped to the fridge. Gary can't read them, of course. But somehow he always seems to know when they're about him. He blinks slowly, leans in closer, lets out a low, grateful meow, as if to say, "I love you too, SpongeBob." And at night, the routine begins again. Lights dimmed, blankets pulled up. The pineapple home sighs into stillness. SpongeBob sometimes talks in his sleep, little fragment of jellyfish dreams and Krusty Krab adventures. And in the quiet, Gary listens. He doesn't sleep the same way SpongeBob does. Snails drift, half aware, half asleep, resting in soft stillness while the ocean hums. And in that soft, night-like glow, Gary watches over him. Not guarding, just being there. Because sometimes, just knowing someone is close, someone who loves you, who knows you, who hears you even in silence, is all it takes to fall peacefully asleep. Bikini Bottom is full of characters with bold personalities. Patrick with his wild ideas, Sandy with her science and spark, Squidward with his moods and music. But Gary doesn't need a spotlight. He's the quiet one, the background rhythm, the unspoken melody in the song of SpongeBob's life. He doesn't chase attention. He doesn't perform. He just lives, softly, calmly, lovingly. And maybe that's his greatest magic. He teaches by example that it's okay to be quiet, to observe instead of speak, to love with your presence, not just your words. When SpongeBob was a bit younger, he once tried to teach Gary tricks. Roll over, fetch a shell, sit still on command. Gary stared at him with patient eyes, then slowly turned away and went to nap on a warm towel in the sunlight. SpongeBob laughed. And that was the end of training, because Gary already had his way of communicating. Through head tilts, blinks, the pace of his slow crawl, and those signature meows, soft, low, sometimes with a questioning rise at the end. It wasn't about control or performance. It was about connection. SpongeBob would later say, "Gary doesn't need to speak like me. He just gets me, and isn't that what we all long for? Not to be explained, but simply understood." There are long days when SpongeBob comes home from work, drained and dizzy from the bustle of Bikini Bottom. Customers shouting, fryers sizzling, Squidward grumbling. The chaos sticks to him like seaweed. But as soon as he opens the front door, Gary is there. One soft meow, a nudge of the shell. And somehow, SpongeBob feels like everything is okay again. He once said, "It's like Gary presses a reset button on my brain." No words, just the calm of shared space. A reminder that home is not just a place, but the soul who waits for you there. They say Gary is just a pet. But sometimes, SpongeBob wonders, what if Gary is more? A guardian snail watching over him since birth. A quiet protector assigned by the sea itself. An old soul carrying ocean wisdom in his shell. After all, who else can sense when SpongeBob is about to make a mistake before he makes it? Who else can tell when a Krabby Patty has too much mustard without even tasting it? And who else can recognize SpongeBob's sadness before SpongeBob himself even notices? There's something mystical about Gary. Not magical in a flashy way, but magical like a lullaby, or the hush of the tide, or the warmth of a blanket on a cold night. And every so often, when SpongeBob has those quiet, reflective evenings, he'll sit beside Gary and whisper, "You know, Gare, if I ever become famous or rich or anything big, I hope you know you'll always be the reason I got there." Gary never replies, but he blinks twice and leans his shell ever so slightly against SpongeBob's arm. That's enough. Years have passed, but Gary never seems to age. Maybe he's a little slower now. Maybe his shell carries more tiny scratches, each one a memory, a chapter, a day spent beside his best friend. But his spirit, still the same, still gentle, still grounding, still there. Every night, when SpongeBob slips into his square pajamas and crawls into bed, Gary curls up close by, near the foot, never too far. SpongeBob pulls the covers up to his chin and whispers his final thought of the day. "Love you, buddy." A soft meow replies. Then silence. Then sleep. And somewhere in that silence, in the still ocean night, two souls rest, connected not by words or time or logic, but by trust, by history, by 1,000 quiet moments, by love, pure and simple. Just SpongeBob and Gary, forever. And somewhere in that silence, in the still ocean night, two souls rest, connected not by words or time or logic, but by trust, by history, by 1,000 quiet moments, by love, pure and simple. Just SpongeBob and Gary, forever. Long after the sun has dipped below the waves and the glow of jellyfish has dimmed for the night, there is one window in Bikini Bottom that still flickers with soft golden light. It's not the Krusty Krab, not SpongeBob's pineapple. It's the Easter Island head, Squidward's home. Inside, the music is gentle. The clarinet hums like a memory, slow and low. Each note floats, like bubbles rising lazily to the surface. This is Squidward's time, when the world is quiet, or when the kitchen is closed, when the phone doesn't ring. This is when Squidward becomes who he truly is, not a cashier, not a grumbler, not just the neighbor with an attitude, but an artist. Squidward Tentacles isn't easy to understand at first glance. He scowls. He sighs. He rolls his eyes a lot. But deep beneath that long oval face is a spirit that feels deeply. And when you feel that much, the world can feel loud. Too loud. That's why he seeks beauty in silence, in the whisper of paint on canvas, in the rise and fall of clarinet tones, in the brushstroke of solitude. Because art, real art, is where he speaks the loudest, even when he says nothing at all. As a young cephalopod, Squidward didn't want to be popular. He wanted to be understood. He would sit in his room, tiny tentacles wrapped around a beginner's clarinet, puffing notes that squeaked and stumbled, but always came from the heart. Other sea kids might have been playing reef ball outside, but not Squidward. He was sketching faces, molding self-portraits out of sand and coral, practicing the same musical phrase over and over until it sounded just right, at least to him. He imagined himself performing in grand concert halls under the sea, audiences dressed in coral tuxedos, tears in their eyes from the beauty of his playing. In his dreams, they didn't laugh. They listened. And when he opened his eyes, he'd return to reality, his small, shell-shaped mirror, his unfinished canvas, and a silence that was sometimes comforting and sometimes terribly lonely. Squidward's artistic soul has always been a quiet rebellion. A rebellion against a world that demands noise and speed and cheerfulness on command. He doesn't want to be flashy. He wants to be felt. He doesn't chase applause. He yearns for resonance. So when SpongeBob comes crashing in with jellyfish nets and exploding bubble wands, Squidward's sighs aren't just frustration, they're heartbreak. Because his sanctuary is delicate, and joy for him is fragile. It's not loud or colorful. It's a still life, a moody clarinet solo, a sculpture made in total silence that never gets seen, but somehow heals him anyway. At the Krusty Krab, Squidward is just the cashier. But when the clock strikes closing time and the apron comes off, he walks home with a glimmer of something in his step, like a secret only he knows. Because at home, in the gentle candlelight, he creates worlds. A sculpture of a sea nymph carved from driftwood. A painting of abstract coral landscapes in stormy blues and burnt oranges. Or a clarinet solo written in his own hand, filled with aching pauses and unexpected grace notes. And sure, maybe no one else understands. Maybe his art isn't in a museum. Maybe his clarinet solos sound a little sharp. But in those moments, Squidward is whole. Some nights he opens his window, lets the ocean breeze in, and plays. Not for fame, not for praise, but for the sea, for the stars above, for the version of himself he believes in. And once, just once, SpongeBob heard that music in the distance. It was different from Squidward's usual playing, less forced, more gentle, like the sea itself was sighing. He didn't knock. He didn't interrupt. He just listened quietly outside his own window. And for a moment, two very different neighbors were connected, not by words, but by feeling, by sound, by art, by the invisible language Squidward speaks best. There's something special about the way Squidward holds a paintbrush. He doesn't rush. He doesn't dab randomly or fling colors across the canvas. He moves with purpose, like every stroke has meaning. Like every hue he mixes carries part of a story only he knows. His favorites are moody blues, sea greens, and soft grays. Colors that feel like low tides and cloudy skies. Colors that whisper instead of shout. On evenings when the Krusty Krab's stress still clings to his skin, Squidward slips into his art space like a ritual. He lights a single candle, sets his favorite vinyl seashell record on the turntable, and lets himself breathe. Outside, the city buzzes with reef taxis and glowing jellyfish. But inside, it's just him, and silence, and the canvas. Some pieces he never finishes. Not because he gives up, but because sometimes just starting the painting is enough. He'll stare at the swirls of color and remember what he was feeling that day. Loneliness. Hope. A small spark of joy he couldn't quite name. And in that unfinished painting, it's all there, preserved like a fossil. a diary made not of words but of pigment. Of course, Squidward's art isn't always understood. At gallery nights, he's shown his self-portraits, his boldest, most personal expressions. One piece was called The Bold and Briny, another internal echoes of a tentacled spirit. He stood beside them proudly, arms crossed, chin lifted. But the guests, they didn't quite get it. They chuckled softly. One asked if it was supposed to be upside down. Another said it looked like an abstract jellyfish in crisis. Squidward tried to keep a straight face, but it stung, because what they didn't realize was it wasn't just a painting. It was him, laid bare, tentacle to heart. And when your heart gets laughed at, it hurts. Still, he doesn't stop creating, because he doesn't do it for applause. He does it because it's how he makes sense of the world. When the Krusty Krab customers are loud and ungrateful. When SpongeBob accidentally sets off a bubble storm right outside his window. When the loneliness feels just a little too sharp, he goes to his clarinet, to his paints, to his art. It's his refuge, his reset button, his silent best friend. Even his sculptures, strange and angular, often of himself, are little love letters to the idea that he matters. That even if no one in Bikini Bottom understands him, he still exists in full color, still feels deeply, still dreams. There's one statue in particular that sits in the corner of his living room. It's tall, made from bleached coral and volcanic stone. The face is long, the eyes hollow, the mouth slightly open, as if whispering a secret. He calls it acceptance. He built it after a particularly rough week. A customer had spilled an entire kelp soda on his art portfolio. SpongeBob had accidentally thrown a clarinet reed into the garbage disposal. And when Squidward came home, he felt invisible, forgotten. But instead of sulking, he sculpted, hour after hour, chiseling the ache into shape. When it was done, he didn't feel happy exactly, but he felt real, and sometimes that's enough. On rare occasions, there are moments when others do glimpse Squidward's soul. Once SpongeBob quietly framed one of Squidward's discarded sketches, one he'd tossed in the bin, thinking it was a failure. He didn't say anything. He just hung it on his wall. When Squidward saw it later on a surprise visit, it caught him off guard. He stared at it for a long time, then asked, in a quieter voice than usual, "Why would you hang that?" And SpongeBob, smiling in his usual soft, oblivious way, replied, "Because it made me feel calm, like jellyfishing at sunset." Squidward didn't say anything else. But that night, his clarinet solo was softer than usual. Almost grateful. Art for Squidward is the part of him no one else gets to see. The tender part, the romantic, the dreamer. Even if the world never applauds, never understands, his soul remains. Painted, carved, played into the night. Because some spirits weren't meant to be loud. They were meant to be felt quietly. Like ripples in the ocean. Like music heard through the walls. Like a brushstroke only visible when the light hits just right. And that is the soul of Squidward tentacles. Sometimes Squidward wonders what his life might have looked like in another place. A city far above the ocean floor, where artists sip kelp lattes at corner cafes and perform moody clarinet solos in soft-lit lounges. A place where talent is not only seen, but celebrated. Where applause doesn't feel like a fantasy, but a warm wave washing over you night after night. He daydreams of gallery openings with guests in turtlenecks and monocles saying things like, "Ah, yes, the emotional tension in the brushwork. It's divine." He dreams of standing beneath a spotlight as a hush falls over the room. He lifts his clarinet, breathes in, and every note that spills from the reed feels like a poem drifting into the dark. In those dreams, he's understood, not pitied, not mocked, just seen. And yet, when he opens his eyes, he's still in Bikini Bottom, still in his familiar, cozy home, still next to SpongeBob, still working at the Krusty Krab, wearing a paper hat that feels more like a cage than a crown. But what's remarkable is that Squidward hasn't let go of those dreams. Not completely. Even when the sea feels small. Even when the world seems to laugh. There's a part of him that holds on. Like a candle flame that refuses to flicker out, no matter how cold the current gets. Every Tuesday night, without fail, Squidward practices his clarinet for an hour straight. He closes the blinds, puts on his favorite silk robe, lights a faintly lavender-scented jellyfish wax candle, and plays. Sometimes it scales, other times a slow improvisation drawn from nothing but feeling. And when he finishes, there's silence. But not empty silence. Content silence. The kind that wraps around him like a blanket. He once wrote a composition called Echoes Through Coral. He never performed it for anyone. It was soft, layered, a little melancholic but warm. It began with a gentle tapping rhythm, meant to sound like the tide brushing over stone. Then came the melody, slow, wavering, like something remembered from a dream. He played it once, recorded it onto a cassette, labeled it in his neatest handwriting, and tucked it into a drawer with his other private treasures. A note from his grandmother, an old self-portrait on sea parchment, a tiny bottle of sea mint cologne he only wears when he's feeling brave. No one else has ever heard that piece. But Squidward likes knowing it's there, because not everything beautiful has to be shared. Some things are just for you, just for the soul. You might not notice it at first glance, but Squidward's home is filled with little traces of his artistic spirit. There's a small oil painting above his bed, a view of a mountain above sea level. He's never seen it in real life, but in his dreams he climbs it often. There's a sculpture in the hallway made entirely from broken seashells. Each one collected during his morning walks when no one's watching and the city is still asleep. Even his curtains are hand-dyed, a gentle ombre that fades from ocean blue to foggy gray. He says it reminds him of a storm calming down. He doesn't show these things off. There's no tour, no bragging, but they speak all the same. Squidward's world may be quiet, but it's full. And then there are the moments, those rare, unexpected moments, when his art connects. Once during an especially stormy night, Squidward sat on his front porch playing the clarinet softly. The waves were crashing. Lightning flickered in the distance. The streets were empty. But then he heard it, a soft clap. He looked up, and there, under an umbrella, SpongeBob stood, soaked, smiling. "You sounded peaceful," he said, voice barely above the wind. Squidward didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just nodded. And for a moment, just a sliver of a moment, he didn't feel so misunderstood after all. Art doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums. And Squidward, for all his sarcasm, his grumbling, his need for solitude, is always humming with feeling. Whether it's in the curl of his sculpture, the stroke of his brush, or the wavering note of his clarinet. He's telling a story, a soft story, a deep one. The kind you don't always hear right away. But if you're still and patient and quiet enough, you'll feel it. Just like the ocean's current. Just like a dream that stays with you, even after you wake. One of Squidward's favorite places in all of Bikini Bottom isn't his living room, or the Krusty Krab, or even the art supply store downtown. It's the overlook just beyond Jellyfish Fields. There's a spot, barely noticeable, where a single coral bench sits beneath a leaning rock arch. It faces the open sea where the water turns from turquoise to deep blue, fading into a soft horizon. He discovered it by accident years ago. He was trying to avoid SpongeBob as usual, and wandered farther than he meant to. And there it was, perfectly quiet, perfectly still. Since then, it's become his hidden sanctuary, a place where the world stops asking him to be anything other than himself. Sometimes he brings a sketch pad. Other times, just his thoughts. He sits, he watches. And for a while, everything else melts away. In moments like these, Squidward's inner world comes alive. He imagines putting on his own art exhibit right there in the reef. Each painting hung from coral hooks, illuminated by soft, glowing sea lanterns. Guests swimming slowly by, sipping bubble tea, admiring his brushstrokes with hushed appreciation. He dreams of a quiet round of applause, followed by someone whispering, "You can feel the loneliness in this one, but also the hope." Squidward has always lived between those two tides, loneliness and hope. And perhaps, in his art, he found a bridge between them. On especially peaceful days, when the water is calm and the skies above shimmer with sunlight, Squidward closes his eyes and listens. Not for noise, but for stillness. He believes, perhaps more than anyone in Bikini Bottom, that silence is not empty. It's full of things unsaid. Memories, longing, colors waiting to be painted, songs waiting to be played. He once said, only to himself, that the silence of the sea was louder than any crowd he'd ever performed for. And he meant it. Because silence, when embraced, becomes a kind of music, one that only the heart understands. Despite how often he grumbles, Squidward is a creature of habit. Every morning he boils exactly 1.5 cups of kelp tea. He slices one banana coral loaf always from the left side. He plays one clarinet scale before brushing his teeth. And he reads a single page from his favorite poetry book, titled Seafoam Solitude. These rituals are more than just routines. They're quiet acts of grounding. Ways to anchor his spirit in a world that often feels too noisy, too busy, too SpongeBob. Speaking of SpongeBob, as much as Squidward complains, a small part of him, buried deep beneath the sarcasm, appreciates the yellow sponge's unwavering spirit. SpongeBob believes in beauty, too, just in a much louder way. Where Squidward paints melancholy sunsets, SpongeBob crafts rainbow pancakes. Where Squidward's clarinet echoes through silence, SpongeBob's laughter fills the air like confetti. Different art. Same art. And though Squidward would never say it aloud, some part of him finds comfort in SpongeBob's constant presence. Because in a world that sometimes forgets the artists, the dreamers, the quiet souls, SpongeBob never forgets Squidward. There was a night, not too long ago, when Squidward couldn't sleep. The storm outside was gentle, but constant. Rain tapping against his windows like an impatient composer. He lit a candle, took out his sketch pad, and without thinking, began to draw. Not a self-portrait, not a sculpture idea, but a scene. SpongeBob and Patrick sitting in jellyfish fields, laughing softly. Clouds shaped like jellyfish floating above them. Squidward watching from a distance, half smiling. It wasn't polished. It wasn't even fully shaded. But it was honest. He tore it out, taped it behind the mirror in his hallway. Because sometimes the things we hide are the things that make us feel most human. Squidward may never headline a grand concert hall. His sculptures may never sit in a royal museum, and his name may never appear in glowing letters across the reef. But his art exists, and it matters to him. And maybe that's enough. Because the sea doesn't ask its waves to be famous. It just lets them rise and fall, softly, rhythmically, endlessly, just like Squidward. A quiet soul with a clarinet, a heart full of color, and a dream that refuses to fade. As he lays down each night, the sounds of the ocean curl around him like a lullaby. He closes his eyes, imagines brushstrokes across the stars, and lets the silence sing him to sleep. Because in Bikini Bottom, under the sea, even the most misunderstood artist finds peace eventually. Especially when he finally lets himself be still. The Krabby Patty. More than a burger. More than a menu item. It's a legend. Quietly sizzling on a grill at the heart of Bikini Bottom. People line up at the Krusty Krab without thinking twice. They order, they chew, they smile. But few pause to ask, why does it taste so perfect? Why does it feel like comfort and joy and something forgotten from childhood, served between two buns? Some say it's just the seasoning. Others whisper it's magic. But beneath the kitchen smoke and sesame seeds, there's a story. And it starts not with Mr. Krabs, but with a storm. Many years ago, before SpongeBob had even earned his first spatula, Bikini Bottom was hit by a rare seaquake. The ocean floor shifted. Sand clouds billowed. And from beneath a forgotten reef, something rose. A tiny cave, tucked behind curtains of kelp. Inside, a stone tablet, half buried, worn smooth with time, etched into it. A symbol. 2 circles, a squiggle in the middle, and a triangle underneath. Some thought it was art. Others thought it was a menu. But the one who saw it as a blueprint was a young Eugene Krabs. Mr. Krabs wasn't always obsessed with money. Once upon a time, he was simply curious. A tinkerer, a traveler. He'd spend days diving for treasures, old bottles, driftwood. Not to sell, just to understand. That day, when he found the tablet, he felt something shift. Not in the sea, but in himself. He brought the stone home, polished it, stared at it. And night after night, he dreamed of food. Not just any food, food that made fish feel things. He began experimenting, mixing coral shavings with kelp essence, boiling sea foam with toasted plankton crumbs. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it smoked. But one night, in the quiet of his ship-shaped shack, he created a patty that sizzled with something more. When he tasted it, he didn't smile. He cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft, single tear that rolled down his cheek as he whispered, This is it. He opened a food stand the next day. Not the Krusty Krab, not yet. Just a simple cart by the docks, a sign that read, Try something new. He gave out patties for free, watched as fish tasted them, watched their eyes widen, watched them come back the next day, and the next, And the next. Word spread. Faster than he ever imagined. Not just because the burgers were good, but because people said they felt better after eating them. Like something heavy inside them had lifted. Like they'd just remembered a happy memory, even if they didn't know what it was. And so began the rise of the Krabby Patty. But even then, the recipe was still evolving. Mr. Krabs didn't write it down. He didn't need to. It lived in his hands, his instincts. A pinch here, a splash there. But always something else, something unspoken. He'd hum softly as he cooked, a lullaby passed down from his mother. He believed it helped. That music could stir emotion into the food. The Krusty Krab came later, a second-hand building shaped like a lobster trap. Not much to look at, but it had character. He hired help, trained fry cooks, lost some, hired others. But none could make the patties quite right. Until one day, a square-shaped sponge walked in, with wide eyes, a hopeful heart, and a spatula already in hand. Mr. Krabs didn't expect much. But the moment SpongeBob flipped his first patty, something clicked. Not just the sound of the sizzle, but the feeling in the room. He was right. SpongeBob didn't just make food. He infused it with joy, with care. And somehow, he understood the rhythm of that old lullaby. Since then, the Krabby Patty has remained unchanged. Or so it seems. But here's the thing. The secret recipe, it isn't just ingredients. It's emotion. It's memory, connection, comfort. The truth is, maybe the formula Mr. Krabs guards so fiercely isn't written on paper. Maybe it's written in the hands of those who truly care. And as SpongeBob flips another patty late into the night, while soft music plays on the old radio, and the glow from the grill lights his face like a campfire, the story continues. Not in loud ways, but in quiet moments, in each bite. Because legends don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear hats and aprons and serve hope with extra pickles. It's often said that the Krabby Patty's flavor is unmatched. But what if it's not just the flavor people taste? What if it's familiarity? Think about it. Every bite brings a warmth that feels like home, like a hug you forgot you needed, like the scent of something baking in a childhood kitchen. That's the magic of it. The Krabby Patty doesn't just feed the belly. It feeds something deeper. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real reason Plankton wants it so badly. To the outside world, it looks like a rivalry, a comical battle between crabs and Plankton. One guards the formula, the other schemes and plots. But what if Plankton isn't just after money? What if, deep down, he wants to feel what everyone else feels when they take that first bite? What if the Krabby Patty is the one thing that reminds him of something he's lost? A memory, a moment, a friend. Because, you see, once upon a time, crabs and Plankton weren't enemies. They were partners. Long before the Krusty Krab, they dreamed together. Two young minds in a tiny town, fascinated by food, flavor, and invention. They built a tiny burger stand together called the Lunch Buddies. They sold a simple sandwich. No secret sauce, no mystery. But it was enough. Enough to spark imagination. Enough to dream bigger. But dreams can divide, too. Crabs wanted to create something people would love. Plankton wanted something people would need. And so they split. Crabs found flavor. Plankton found frustration. and the Great Divide began. Years passed. Crabs perfected the patty. Plankton built the chum bucket. But no matter how many traps he set or disguises he wore, the formula stayed out of reach. Why? Because it wasn't just locked in a safe. It was locked in something even stronger. Heart, emotion, trust. It's easy to think the secret lies in some unusual ingredient. Starfish sauce, moonlight pickles, ghost pepper salt. But the truth is simpler and sweeter. Mr. Krabs has said once quietly that the most important part of the recipe is the intention. He cooks with purpose. SpongeBob cooks with joy. Even the way the lettuce is layered or the bun is toasted, it matters. Because the patty reflects the cook. When SpongeBob is happy, the patty is perfect. When he's distracted or worried, he remakes it chinky, not because he was told to, but because he feels it. There are stories, whispers really, of a day when SpongeBob almost quit. A stormy afternoon. The power went out, and SpongeBob for a moment doubted himself. He stood in the kitchen, spatula in hand, the grill cold, the walls dark, and yet, even then, he cooked. He cooked with care. He hummed that soft lullaby Mr. Krabs once sang in passing. And when he finished, the Krabby Patty that emerged was said to be the best ever made. No one could say why. Some claimed it glowed. Some cried when they ate it. But SpongeBob simply smiled and served the next order. Customers don't know all this, of course. To them, it's just a burger. Delicious, yes. Comforting, sure. But behind that simplicity is a tapestry of stories, memories, and quiet traditions passed down in the shadows of the Krusty Krab. Sandy once theorized that the patties react to the emotional frequency of the cook. She even ran a few experiments. SpongeBob's patty made under joy, fluffy, golden, savory. Under stress, flat, uneven, overcooked. Under peace and gratitude, almost. Healing. Even Patrick, with his carefree ways, once tried to cook a Krabby Patty. It was edible, but something was missing. Something unseen. That's when SpongeBob explained it gently. You don't just cook a Krabby Patty, you love it into being. Patrick didn't quite get it, but he smiled anyway. And that's enough. Back in the earliest days of the Krusty Krab, Mr. Krabs used to write little notes on the bottom of the burger wrappers. Tiny things. You're doing great. Today is a good day. Thanks for being you. He said no one ever noticed. But years later, an old customer came back. An elderly fish with tired eyes and a soft voice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrapper. Yellowed, worn, folded carefully. The note said, "You matter." He kept it for years. Because, he said, on the day he got that patty, he needed those words. That's the real secret. Not the sauce, not the salt, not the sesame seeds. It's the kindness baked into the bun, the compassion grilled into the patty. The joy tucked between the layers of lettuce and tomato. And once you know that, you begin to see the Krabby Patty not just as food, but as a story, a lullaby, a gentle reminder that small things made with love can make a big difference. There's a soft clinking sound in the Krusty Krab kitchen late at night. Long after the lights have dimmed, long after the last customer has left, you might still hear SpongeBob at the grill, not cooking for anyone, just practicing, just listening to the gentle sizzle, to the whisper of oil dancing across the metal, to the quiet of a space he calls home. Some say this is where the patties truly come alive, not under pressure, but in peace. You see, the Krabby Patty doesn't need an audience. It doesn't crave applause. It just wants to be made with care. And that's exactly what SpongeBob gives it. Every single time. No shortcuts. No substitutions. Just heart. Sometimes in the stillness of those nights, Mr. Krabs will poke his head in. He won't say much. Just a nod. Maybe a chuckle. Sometimes he'll sit in his little office and hum sea shanties while SpongeBob works. And for that short, peaceful window of time, there's no hustle, no schemes, no secret formulas to guard. Just a quiet kitchen, a warm stove, and the kind of silence that feels safe. There's an old legend, one few remember. It tells of a fisherman long ago who cast his net not for fish, but for flavor. He wandered the sea collecting the essence of moments, the crisp bite of a winter morning, the sweetness of a child's laugh, the salt of tears shed in joy. He bottled them all, and he called it the essence of everything. Some whisper that essence is hidden in the Krabby Patty, not in drops or dashes, but in the emotion each cook brings to it. One theory suggests that the Krabby Patty recipe actually changes, ever so slightly, with each person who makes it. SpongeBob's patties taste bright, joyful, full of sunshine. If Squidward ever tried, perhaps his would be more refined, complex, a little bitter, but thoughtful. And Mr. Krabs? His patties might carry the boldness of a dreamer, and the warmth of someone who, despite his gruffness, cares deeply about tradition. Some even believe the secret formula is blank, a piece of paper that says nothing at all. Because the real secret was never meant to be written. It was meant to be felt, and guarded not in safes or vaults, but in the hands of those who love what they do. That's what makes SpongeBob so special. He doesn't make patties for praise. He doesn't chase fame. He cooks because he can't not cook. Because something in his spongy little heart lights up when he hears the grill crackle. When he flips a patty mid-air with the perfect arc. When he places it gently on a bun and sees it smile back at him. It's not just food. It's a friend. A quiet companion in a sometimes loud world. Even the layout of the Krabby Patty seems intentional. The bun is a roof offering shelter. The lettuce is a soft breeze of freshness. The tomato, a splash of joy. The patty, grounding, savory, safe. And the bottom bun, the foundation, the anchor. Every layer tells a part of the story. Every ingredient has a purpose. Once a young customer asked SpongeBob why the patties always look exactly the same. He smiled and said, "Because they come from the same place. Not the freezer. My heart." The child didn't quite understand. But years later, they returned, older, wiser. And when they took a bite again, they whispered, "I remember now, because taste has memory." And the Krabby Patty holds more memories than most meals ever will. Sandy once tried to analyze a patty in her lab. She broke it down scientifically, measured everything, accounted for variables. But the test results were confusing. Each patty had something immeasurable. A joy signature, she called it. Something that couldn't be recreated in a lab, no matter how many times she tried. Because the missing ingredient wasn't physical. It was emotional. A kind of flavor that only comes from caring. It's no wonder Plankton fails every time he steals the formula. He can copy the words, replicate the steps, even match the ingredients, gram for gram. But the patties always fall flat, because he's cooking from frustration, from anger, from jealousy. And those emotions change the taste. You can't fake love. Not in the kitchen. Not in a patty. Not in anything, really. Back in the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob sets another patty on the grill. The kitchen glows softly in the low light. A breeze from the ocean filters through the window. The jellyfish are asleep. The city is quiet. And in that moment, as the patty sizzles and the scent of something warm and wonderful fills the air, all is well. Because somewhere, in some corner of the ocean, a sleepy soul is being comforted by something simple, something familiar, something made with love. A Krabby Patty. As the moon rises higher above Bikini Bottom, its silvery glow softly reflects off the Krusty Krab's weathered windows. Inside, the kitchen hums quietly with the warmth of leftover energy from the day's work. The grill is cooling now, the last sizzle having drifted into silence. SpongeBob places the spatula down gently, almost like tucking it in for the night. He wipes the counter slowly, not to clean it, but more like a ritual. One final stroke to honor the place where magic happens every day. Magic, not in the flashy, sparkling kind of way, but in the humble kind. The kind you can taste. The kind that reminds you of something comforting you didn't even know you missed. They say food speaks a language of its own. If that's true, then the Krabby Patty speaks in lullabies. It tells stories with its layers. It hums gentle melodies through every bite. It whispers, "You're safe here. Everything is okay." Not every burger can do that. But then again, not every burger is made by SpongeBob. Sometimes the quietest things leave the biggest impression. A patty flipped with care. A sesame seed perfectly in place. A little hum from SpongeBob as he works, soft and cheerful, like a song only the kitchen walls get to hear. That's the real secret, isn't it? Not what goes into the patty, but what surrounds it. The love in the air, the memories in the walls, the joy radiating from a sponge who just truly, deeply loves what he does. Some nights, after SpongeBob has gone home and tucked himself into bed with Gary nestled nearby, the Krusty Krab rests too. The lights go out. The ocean current brushes past its wooden walls. And if you stood very still outside its doors, you might imagine, just maybe, the scent of a Krabby Patty lingers. Not overpowering, not calling attention to itself, just there, like a soft memory or a warm thought, a comforting reminder that something good happened here and will happen again tomorrow. Mr. Krabs, for all his obsession with the secret formula, knows this in his heart. He might chase gold and count every penny, but deep down, he understands that the Krabby Patty is more than a product. It's his legacy, his pride, his connection to something greater than money. The Krabby Patty keeps Bikini Bottom grounded. It's a gathering place, a comfort zone, a symbol of everyday joy. In the corner of the Krusty Krab's back room, there's an old photograph pinned to the wall. It's faded from time. The edges are curled. But in it, you see a young Mr. Krabs, smiling proudly next to the first Krabby Patty ever made. There's no customer in the photo, no grand ceremony. Just him, the patty, and the beginnings of something special. Something that would one day feed not just stomachs, but souls. And in the end, maybe that's all it was ever meant to be. Not a product to protect, not a secret to steal, but a recipe for kindness, for warmth, for connection. A reminder that the simplest things, when made with care, can become the most treasured. That in a noisy world, a quiet burger cooked with love can still change a life, can still feel like home. SpongeBob, resting peacefully in his pineapple, dreams of patties dancing on jellyfish fields. He dreams of pickles that giggle and buns that bounce like clouds. He dreams of the crusty crab filled with laughter and the smell of fresh patties floating through the air like music. He smiles in his sleep. And far away in some quiet room, someone else dreams too. Because that's what stories like this do. They travel. They comfort. They tuck us in, one gentle word at a time. The Krabby Patty may be many things, a mystery, a masterpiece, a bedtime story between buns. But above all, it is a promise that no matter what changes, no matter how loud the world gets, there will always be a place where something good is waiting for you. Warm, soft, smiling, right there on a sesame seed bun. And so as the night settles over Bikini Bottom, the Krusty Krab rests beneath the waves, its doors closed, its kitchen still, its story whispered across the sea, waiting to be heard again tomorrow. And somewhere in the ocean darkness, the spirit of the Krabby Patty smiles, because it knows it was never just a burger. It was a feeling, and feelings, when shared, can last forever. The sun had long since dipped below the ocean's edge, leaving Bikini Bottom bathed in a soft blue twilight. Above, the surface ripples shimmered like moonlight on silk, casting a dim, silvery glow across the quiet town. The usual sounds of laughter, clanking spatulas, and sea creature chatter had faded into a hush, replaced by the gentle rhythm of the tide brushing over coral and sand. It was bedtime in Bikini Bottom, and for a place so full of color and chaos during the day, the night brought with it a different kind of beauty, slower, softer, like a lullaby in the form of glowing jellyfish and swaying seagrass. Somewhere near the outskirts of town, SpongeBob's pineapple house stood still, its leafy green top rustling faintly in the current. Inside, the lights were low. A single seashell lamp glowed softly in his bedroom. SpongeBob, curled beneath a cozy blue blanket, lay on his side with a peaceful smile stretched across his face. Gary the Snail was already dozing at the foot of the bed, making faint mow-bloop sounds as he dreamed of, well, whatever it is snails dream about. SpongeBob had fed him earlier, read him a bedtime poem, and even tucked him in with his favorite coral plush. Now the house was quiet, except for the ticking of a starfish-shaped clock and the occasional sleepy sigh from SpongeBob. Even in sleep, he looked content. His day had been filled with the simple joys he loved, flipping patties, waving to neighbors, and blowing a particularly large bubble that floated all the way past Sandy's tree dome. He had nothing to worry about, nothing to rush toward, nothing but the dreams unfolding softly behind his eyes. Across town, in the stone face of a moai head, Squidward's house was dim as well. The clarinet rested on its stand beside his bed, like a trusted companion that had just finished telling a story in song. Squidward lay under a neatly pressed seafoam green comforter, one arm tucked behind his head, the other gently cradling a pillow. His eyes were half closed, but not quite asleep yet. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of kelp leaves brushing against his window. He had spent the evening painting. The canvas still stood on its easel, a half-finished image of a coral reef bathed in moonlight. The brushstrokes were bold but elegant, thoughtful and deliberate, just like him. As the quiet wrapped around him, Squidward exhaled slowly. The night was the only time he truly felt alone with his thoughts. Not lonely, just still. No SpongeBob knocking. No Mr. Krabs barking orders. No clarinet mistakes, just the silence and the comfort of knowing tomorrow would come slowly with another chance to create. He turned on his side and closed his eyes. Just a few jellyfish drifts away in a rocky brown dome sealed with an airlock. Sandy Cheeks was finishing a chapter of her favorite science journal. Her reading glasses sat perched on her nose, and the glow from her lamp cast a warm circle of light across her hammock. She had spent the day tweaking her bubble generator, a new invention that let jellyfish ride bubbles for fun. Now her tools were packed away neatly, and her helmet was hanging beside her lab coat near the door. As Sandy set her journal down, she took a deep breath. Even in her air-filled dome, she could feel the calming energy of the sea outside the slow swirl of the current, the distant echo of a whale's song, the pulse of the reef breathing in harmony with the ocean. "Night, y'all," she whispered, even though no one else was around. And with that, she pulled the blanket over her shoulders and let her eyes drift closed, carried gently toward dreams of Texas skies and undersea wonders. Meanwhile, down below a rocky slope where coral glowed softly like lanterns, Patrick Starr's rock creaked open. Inside, the sleepy starfish was already out cold, sprawled belly down on a pile of sand with a big smile on his face. His TV was still on, playing reruns of a show with loud colors and silly sounds, but Patrick didn't notice. He had fallen asleep during the opening credits. His night had been simple, as always. He had eaten a peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich, looked at the moon, or at least the round light bulb above his fridge, and made a wish for more cookies tomorrow. Now he snored gently, his arm around a jellyfish-shaped pillow, dreaming the carefree dreams of someone who never worries and always sleeps well. His rock slowly closed again, sealing in the warm, content hum of Patrick's sleep. The whole town of Bikini Bottom had begun to exhale together, as if the sea itself was rocking it to sleep, as if the stars above were singing a lullaby in bubbles. And in the stillness of this gentle night, every character, every home, was part of the same slow, drifting dream. Outside, the soft current carried trails of glowing plankton like fairy dust. They wove around the coral spires and floated past windows, leaving behind a magical shimmer that seemed to whisper, "Sleep now, the sea is watching over you." At the chum bucket, the lights were out except for a flickering bulb near the entrance. Inside, Plankton sat alone at a table with a steaming cup of kelp tea, his usual scheming put aside for the night. Karen, his computer wife, had powered down after reminding him, once again, that he needed rest too. With a tired sigh, Plankton stared into the cup. He wasn't angry. Not tonight. Instead of thinking about Krabby Patty formulas or failed inventions, he was lost in a rare, quiet thought. What it would be like to simply run a little cafe instead, one with no secrets, just warm tea, soft lighting, and music playing low in the background. He closed his tiny eye, letting the steam rise around him. Outside, a passing jellyfish hovered near the window, its glow painting soft patterns on the wall. Plankton smiled faintly, finished his tea, and slowly climbed into a small bunk nestled in the corner of the lab. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "Tomorrow I'll try again." And with that, he drifted into a dream of gentle waves and bubble-shaped cupcakes. Back at the Krusty Krab, long after the last customer had slurped up their last soda and the grill had cooled, Mr. Krabs was in his office, counting coins by candlelight. Not greedily tonight, just softly, like a bedtime ritual. Each coin had a memory attached. The first dollar he ever made. The time SpongeBob accidentally sold napkins for $5 each. The secret recipe passed down generations. After stacking his last few coins into a neat tower, he leaned back in his chair, staring at an old photo of himself and a younger Pearl, smiling by the docks. The sea outside gently rocked the building. The Krusty Krab was more than a restaurant. It was his legacy, his pride, his anchor. Mr. Krabs stood, stretched his fins, and made his way to the cot in the corner of his office. He pulled a patchwork quilt over his shoulders and murmured, "Good night, me beauty," to the register. The register dinged softly, as if answering back. All across Bikini Bottom, clocks ticked gently. Tiny lights blinked in the soft blue windows. Starfish snored. Jellyfish pulsed silently in the current. The kelp swayed like underwater lullabies. Even the Goo Lagoon was still, its waters calm, the surfboards stacked neatly beside the lifeguard stand. A single hermit crab burrowed deeper into the sand, tucking in for the night. Somewhere near the outskirts of town, in a little driftwood cabin, the old sea narrator who tells these tales was just finishing a mug of seagrass tea. He scribbled the last line in his underwater journal, closed the cover, and smiled to himself. He knew the sea never truly slept. But tonight, it was as close as it ever got. And back at SpongeBob's house, the little sponge rolled over in his sleep, hugging his pillow a bit tighter. A bubble rose gently from his nose, popped silently in the stillness. He dreamt of jellyfish fields under moonlight, Krabby Patties with wings, and his friends all floating together in a sky made of sea foam and music. In his dream, there were no alarms, no orders, no tests to pass. Just laughter, warm sunbeams, and a gentle tide to carry him wherever he wanted to go. And that's the magic of nighttime in Bikini Bottom. As the hours tick on and you lie there, eyes getting heavier, breath becoming slower, you might imagine yourself there too, somewhere in that underwater town, your own house nestled between coral gardens and kelp meadows. Maybe you're walking through the jellyfish fields as the sun sets, or resting on a rock under the stars listening to the soft hum of the ocean. Maybe you're floating, just floating. And in this quiet moment, there's nothing else to do. No sounds but the sea. No light but the moon's glow above the water. No thoughts but the ones that drift slowly through your mind like gentle bubbles, rising and rising until they vanish into peace. Somewhere in a quiet corner of Jellyfish Fields, the night air was warm and still. The buzzing that usually filled the sky with activity had faded into a soft hush. The jellyfish, those glowing dancers of the deep, had all nestled into their bloom clusters, swaying gently like lanterns hung in the dark. They moved as one, like petals in a current, pulsing with dim light. Even the flowers here seemed to close for the night. The jellyfish flowers drooped gently as though tired from a long day of floating and play. And nearby, Patrick's star lay beneath the open sea sky, sprawled atop a sandy hill. A single blade of seagrass swayed back and forth just inches from his mouth, tickling his nose with each lazy inhale. Patrick murmured something unintelligible in his sleep, half a word, maybe the start of a dream, and then let out a long, happy sigh. He wasn't thinking about chores, or plans, or problems. He never really did. But tonight his dreams were especially light. He was dreaming about eating a giant jelly-filled donut that kept rolling away from him across an endless pink desert. And somehow, no matter how fast he waddled, the donut always stayed one step ahead, just out of reach, but never too far. He didn't mind. The chase was fun, and in dreamland, that was enough. Elsewhere, inside her tree dome, Sandy Cheeks was tucked in bed beneath a heavy quilt stitched with little acorns and stars. Her books were stacked neatly beside her. One remained open, its pages fluttering slightly under the air filter's quiet hum. She had been reading about stargazing in the deep sea before her eyelids got too heavy. Her reading glasses slid down her nose as her head slumped onto the pillow. In her dreams, she was floating above the sea, lassoing stars and collecting them in a mason jar. Each time she caught one, it giggled like a firefly. "Gotcha," she whispered in her sleep. The stars twinkled outside the dome, a soft glimmer of moonlight reflected off the treetop glass. And the sea beyond, always patient, always present, cradled her home like a secret hidden beneath the waves. In every corner of Bikini Bottom, rest had taken hold. Boat snails curled into their shells, their soft bodies rising and falling with each breath. The coral reefs whispered to each other in bubbles. Even the seaweed forests, tall and tangled, swayed less tonight, as though the ocean itself was sleeping too. Time didn't move the same down here. It flowed like molasses, thick, slow, peaceful. And somewhere, maybe close, maybe far, was a lullaby being carried by the current. It wasn't sung exactly, but it was felt. It drifted through the town, across rooftops and chimneys, around driftwood and sand dunes, past windows and doorways, gently brushing across the dreams of every sea creature below. The lullaby told no story. It asked no questions. It simply said, "You are safe. You are home. Let go." Back at SpongeBob's house, another bubble floated up from his square nose and popped gently. The room was still lit with a faint underwater glow, casting soft shadows across his room. Gary's shell gleaming dimly in the corner, the jellyfish lamp casting pale patterns on the wall. The little sponge stirred but didn't wake. He was deep in his dream now. He was at a giant Krabby Patty picnic with all his friends, including a jellyfish named Bob who wore a tiny top hat. Sandwiches never ended. The skies were golden. Every time someone laughed, it echoed across the sky like a song. And just when he thought it couldn't get any better, he looked up and saw the moon swimming through the water like a great glowing fish, its fins trailing stardust. He smiled in his sleep. Sometimes it's easy to forget how full of life the sea is, even when it sleeps. But if you sit still long enough, if you quiet your thoughts just a little, you might feel it. The rhythm of the ocean, the beating heart beneath the waves, the pulse of coral and stone, of kelp and sand, of bubble and shell. Tonight, Bikini Bottom sleeps, and so can you. Let the current carry your thoughts away like driftwood, light and aimless. Let your breath slow to match the waves, in and out, like the tide, like a lullaby, like a sponge dreaming in a pineapple under the sea. Above the rooftops of Bikini Bottom, the ocean shimmered softly with moonlight. The surface was so far above, yet the light filtered down like a dream, touching everything with a gentle silver kiss. A slow drift of bubbles rose from a small reef vent. They wobbled as they climbed, catching reflections of coral, starfish, and sleeping anemones. One by one they popped, quietly, politely, like dreams ending only to begin again. In a nearby tide pool, tiny sea critters had stilled. Their world, usually buzzing with clicks and chirps, now hummed only with slow movement and silence. It was as if all of Bikini Bottom had taken a collective breath and held it in peaceful stillness. Inside the chum bucket, where things were often gloomy and tense, even the buzzing machines had gone quiet. Plankton was curled up on a spoon in the corner of the lab, a blanket made from a dish rag draped over him. A single green light blinked slowly from Karen's screen, set to sleep mode. For once, Plankton wasn't scheming or grumbling. He was dreaming. In his dream, he was tall as a Krill's skyscraper, and the world finally listened to him. But strangely, in the dream, he wasn't angry or boastful. He was simply content. He opened a tiny cafe. No one stole any recipes. The coffee was always hot. And there was soft jazz playing all the time. He even gave SpongeBob a discount. Funny how even the most ambitious minds settle down when night wraps around them like a warm tide. Back at the Krusty Krab, the chairs were stacked, the floors swept clean. A lone spatula rested beside the griddle, silent and still. The air carried faint traces of the day's work. Grease, ketchup, salt. But now only the soft hum of the freezer could be heard. In the office, Mr. Krabs sat snoozing in his chair, clutching a photo of his young daughter, Pearl, from her school play. He mumbled a word or two in his sleep. Something about treasure, or bedtime stories, or maybe both. And then with a small snore, he settled deeper into his dream. For all his penny-pinching and crusty behavior, Mr. Krabs, too, had a heart that needed rest. All across town, clocks ticked gently. Not loudly, not demandingly, just enough to remind the sea that time was still flowing, even when no one noticed. The kelp forest beyond the city swayed slowly, hypnotically, as if dancing with the ocean itself. Faint lights from bioluminescent fish blinked like underwater stars. And somewhere far off, a whale's song carried through the deep, long, slow, sorrowful, yet soothing. A lullaby sung by giants. In SpongeBob's room, the jellyfish nightlight flickered once, then steadied. Gary let out a soft meow in his sleep, perhaps dreaming of one more story before lights out. And SpongeBob, still curled under his blanket, his square body rising and falling, smiled faintly. His dreams were quiet now, no longer about jellyfishing or spatulas or clarinets or boating school. Now he simply dreamed of floating, weightless in a bubble, carried by the current, safe and warm. No worries, no noise. Just a soft sea of stars above and the quiet hum of peace all around. Outside his pineapple, the sea anemones pulsed gently. The mailbox rocked ever so slightly in the current. A tiny fish swam by, paused to look at the house, and then drifted on, uninterested but calm. This was the way of Bikini Bottom at night. Not a place of chaos or comedy, but a home. A place of laughter that now rested. Of friends now dreaming. Of stories now sleeping. And in a way, so were we. So if you're still here, listening, letting the ocean cradle you, know that you're not alone. The sea has wrapped around you too. And like SpongeBob, like Patrick, like Squidward, Sandy, and Gary, you're allowed to drift, to dream, to rest. Let the waters carry you deeper into calm. Let the night hold you like a tide pool holds light. Let your thoughts settle like sand after the wave passes. You're safe. You're home. And Bikini Bottom will still be here in the morning. Good night.